Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're good. Hope you can hear me. You know my usual paranoia. If you're new around here, I'm Jack Chew, and today and weekdays we come to you 12:30 till 1 o'clock to chew it over. We discuss whatever's topical, usually in my world of MSK therapies, pain, injury, fitness sometimes, and especially interprofessional issues. We talk about raising standards, and we talk about some of the oohs and ahs of how we present ourselves as therapists in this brave old world of ours. Now, we also have guests on this show on a regular basis. We haven't had any for a while because I've been off air for a little bit. And so one of the things I wanted to mention is I'm sorry for those that have been commenting on LinkedIn and Twitter. They have changed their system slightly, and so I'm not getting your comments up on the chat as we used to. Now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't contribute and comment and stuff, but I might not see them as quickly as I used to. So thank you for those that have been participating. I've not been ignoring you. I'm just sorry I haven't seen them as we used to. But those on Facebook and on Twitch, etc., YouTube, I think that's still working okay. But yeah, sorry about that. But thanks for tuning in today. I will just pull up the caption for today's show. Can't believe it, but it's episode 214, which is crazy. And today I'm going to be joined by Bernadette Johnson, who is going to be talking to us about her experiences living with scoliosis and persistent pain, as well as the fact me and Bernadette have known each other online for a little while now. She's helped with MSKR as well as other organisations to contribute her experience, as well as then give her take on professional issues that affect the sort of the MSK industry at large. You know, we're talking about interprofessional stuff between, say, physios and chiros, and how we might raise standards and how we can make sure that people get the care that they deserve from our system as it stands, and to make sure that we understand things better in society. So Bernadette's always been very generous with the time, and so I've been really looking forward to this. We've had this planned for a few weeks, and so I'm really lucky to be joined by her. So hopefully in the click of a couple of buttons, I will be joined by Bernadette. Bernadette, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for joining me today. Could you introduce yourself to the listeners for us?
Yeah. Hi. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me, Jack. My name's Bernadette Johnson. I am older than I'd like to be. That's all I'm going to say. I I live in just a little village in West Sussex, just outside Brighton. I have two grown-up children and a delightful grandson. And I don't want to say I have scoliosis. It doesn't define me, but nevertheless, that's the purpose of me coming on here to talk about. So I have adolescent idiopathic scoliosis that is progressing as an adult.
And we know each other from you contributing your thoughts on that and your experiences living with scoliosis. And admittedly, I'm sure we'll get into them, some of your frustrations over mismanagement, not just of you, but of others that have had similar experiences to you. Could you talk us through your journey and starting wherever you like, really, in the timeline of that?
Yeah, okay. Well, my scoliosis was first discovered when I was 30, early 30s, after my first baby, when I was having postnatal exercises with physio. It was just a general class. And she came over and said, fairly publicly, "Do you realise you lie in the shape of a banana?" And I said, "Do I?" And she spoke to me afterwards and she said, "Could you go and see your GP? I think you have scoliosis," which I had never heard of. And I went to see my GP, who had heard of it and said, "Yeah, that's scoliosis." And I was sent off to an orthopedic surgeon who said, "You have scoliosis. Don't worry, won't get any worse, and it doesn't hurt." And it was very much sort of factual piece of information that I was given and went away. There was no follow-up, no indication of what the implications of having it were. Now, you might think that because it was diagnosed at that age that it didn't cause me problems, but actually it put into perspective quite a lot of things that had gone on through my adolescent years, namely back pain.
Right.
Back pain and an awareness that I wasn't straight myself. I could feel my spine way over under one shoulder blade. I was very, I tended to have poor posture, and I had significant back pain. I had back pain during PE at school, and it was one of those things that in those days you didn't really mention it. You know, it was back pain, and people had back pain. So it kind of put it in perspective, but then I ignored it basically and carried on just living what my normal life. And I did do quite a lot of exercise in those days. It was a lot of aerobics classes, step classes and things. And I always found things painful, and I was less flexible than most people, but I wasn't overweight. So it didn't sort of bother me that much that I needed to exercise that to a great extent. And I gradually gave up exercising in that fashion, and the pain got worse. I had a second child, and that was really an indicator, that really set off severe pain. But everybody has back pain in pregnancy, so again, it wasn't something I felt I could talk about. I didn't seek much support, and then it got very severe. I found myself constantly caught where I couldn't move because the pain was so bad. And I went back to my doctor. He sent me to a scoliosis specialist in London, who turned out to be the foremost specialist at the time. And that was a private consultation because I had medical insurance through my company. And he said, you have two curves, a 55-degree and a 35-degree, and you need to have surgery to fuse the spine because it will get worse. And up until that time, I'd always been told scoliosis doesn't hurt, scoliosis won't get worse, and nothing can be done if you're fully grown. So that was a real shock to me, and certain amount of frustration and recrimination on my part of, why was I in this position, blah, blah, blah. And then I decided I didn't want surgery. He couldn't really, it was very much this is your only option, and if you don't have it, you will be in a wheelchair. And he used those terms, which was quite scary.
Yeah, big time. When was that then? Sorry, time frame.
That was the early 90s, mid 90s.
Right. Okay.
And then my life took over, 2 young children, husband, parents who needed a bit of support, different things. So time went on, and eventually I felt almost like I couldn't seek help because I had refused surgery. But,
Right. Like there'd be some sort of consequences to that defiance or something like that.
Yes,
People,
yes.
right, okay. How interesting.
I felt slightly guilty, sort of guilty. So someone would say to me, well, what did you expect? But eventually I went back to my GP, and he said, you need to have some physio. I'd had a couple of attempts at physio prior to that were not very successful. I was put in traction for one and told not to carry my baby, which was
wow. Good luck with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was sort of had to take all my clothes off and stand, and she was very irritated that I didn't stand straight, and it was very much like, well, this is how I stand. I don't know any other way of standing, and I was put in traction and left alone, and I thought I'm not doing this again. So
that sounds quite degrading, especially if you're saying that that's your first experience, really. Well, your first main experience in treatment terms for this condition with physiotherapists. That sounds quite degrading then, to be quite exposing for, take your clothes off and have your standing posture criticised and then put onto a rack, essentially, which is what traction is. It doesn't sound a particularly collaborative process, does it?
No,
so
and to be fair, it was, say, in the 90s, but I didn't know any different. But I obviously didn't go back. And again, that feeling of, well, what do I do about it kind of thing. But there was so little information about scoliosis to call upon. And then in the fast forward to 2008, when I went back for physiotherapy, I was quite bad then. I was quite distraught about my condition. I was very in a lot of pain, struggling to hold down my job, which is full-time still, struggling with all sorts of inabilities to commit to things because of pain and peer pressure, you know, have you not sorted your back out yet kind of thing. And then I met my current physio, Paul Johnson, who really has helped me so much. I mean, starting off with it, talking to me about pain and pain science, I became very interested in that, understanding the differences between acute pain and its value and chronic pain and its lack of value, and techniques for coping with pain. I mean, I read a book by Patrick Wall about pain. I read Pain Yarns by Lorimer Moseley, and I became really interested in the language and the narrative of how to explain pain to people who have basically persistent pain. And then the other side of it was he helped me physically. I mean, initially, and my experience up until then, and also anyone I encountered on social media, had been physio for scoliosis is the same as for anyone with back pain. It's stickmen exercises, monthly review, and keep your core strong. And whilst I'm not denying that keeping your core strong, keeping fit is obviously of value to anybody, it's not enough to the scoliosis patient. It doesn't address our individual muscular imbalances. It doesn't address specifically where we struggle to move our bodies because of the curves and because of the asymmetric element of it. And Paul between us, we have developed a therapy that suits me. It enables me to live my life in a better fashion. It helps me with the pain, and it basically, you know, supports my efforts to live with pain.
And that supported self-management is one of the things that I think he speaks about it many places, but also a guest on this show. But Pete Moore has spoken about how really that helping hand of finding that trusted advisor that will collaborate with you, not dictate, but also not just follow. You know, from what I've heard you speak on Twitter, I think it was before, might have been Facebook, about how you really felt like a team. You were negotiating and designing something together. Yes. And so fair play. I mean, it's something, so many people's stories are punctuated in a really meaningful way by a great therapist. And Paul certainly sounds like one. He's no relation though, is he? You share a surname, but it's not like Uncle Paul or something.
No, it's just coincidence we happen to have the same surname, but it is quite a common surname. You're right. And the additional benefit is that it empowers me to be able to take my story and my experience, and because having scoliosis is a huge challenge in the general medical community. I mean, there's so much misinformation, there is so much inaccurate information and wrong, you know, really damaging information that it helps to impact. I find it hugely difficult still to challenge clinicians who tell me something and who re-diagnose me or say, for example, I will still be, I could go tomorrow to a general orthopedic surgeon and still be told the same thing that I was told 20 years ago, that it won't get worse and that it doesn't cause pain and that nothing can be done. And I am still on the surgical list for fusion surgery, should I wish to take it up. I mean, don't get me wrong, I can't click my fingers and say, do it now, but I am a candidate for surgery. And between myself and the orthopedic scoliosis consultant, we have decided that now is still not the right time, but he feels it will be inevitable. And so my kind of purpose in life is to try and postpone that inevitability. Which is a contradiction in terms, but to postpone it for as long as
I know what you're meaning, for sure. That's something that it's really interesting position for you to be in. Does that? How does it? I can imagine it motivating you in some ways to make sure that you postpone as much as possible, but then also it might feel frustrating that your body is changing from within you in such a way, especially having been told and reassured long ago that it wasn't going to. How's that feel?
Yeah, it's not a good position to be in, but what frustrates me most is that it's still a very poor pathway for people who have scoliosis. Not, right. I mean, even children, young people are the pathway is quite poor. You have to be so persistent. From what I'm obviously on a lot of Facebook groups, and there are a huge number, and we all share the same story, that we're told that we shouldn't have pain, and we have no treatment in between being diagnosed. I mean, currently the treatment is just watch and wait, and the waiting is until it gets to a situation, a cob angle of a degree that surgery is offered. And up until that point, there is no treatment apart from bracing, and obviously, bracing is a huge thing to happen to a young growing child through adolescence. But apart from that, there is no treatment for helping us live with the pain. There is no specific targeting of, as I said before, physio. There's no targeted treatment for us, despite the fact there are great movements, or have been since 2014, by the bodies who are involved with scoliosis research into specific exercises and treatment for scoliosis.
Such as the Scroth method.
Scroth method and PSEAS, which is physio-specific exercises for scoliosis, which embody the elements of what Scroth embodies, which is breathing, correct breathing, and correct or different exercises and mobilization of, I don't know if it's mobilization or manipulate, I mean mobilization of the spine, which can actually help stop the progression, has been shown to help stop the progression. Can't obviously straighten the curve, but
that's one of the things that sorry, there's a slight delay there, Bernadette, carry on.
No, I was going to say, and I personally feel that there's such a gap between what we are offered currently from current mainstream medicine, that there's this vacuum has been filled by all these other people jumping on the bandwagon with cures and promises and sometimes damaging and inappropriate treatment, because for scoliosis people there are clear windows that you shouldn't miss. If I had been diagnosed earlier, which is no fault of my parents or anything, it's just in those days you didn't, your back wasn't seen by that many people. You didn't really get that much undressed in a PE class. It wasn't spotted. Nowadays it is spotted. Young girls and boys do all sorts of gyms and activities where you can pick up earlier on scoliosis and maybe get effective treatment. And it's important that those windows of opportunity aren't lost by parents who are desperately seeking relief for their child or for them, and end up going down a different road, shall we say, from what mainstream medicine is offering.
There seems to be, I've experienced two unfortunate extremes with regards to medical professionals and healthcare professionals' interactions with people with scoliosis, where you've got, unfortunately, a very dismissive side, which you sound like you've encountered significantly, implying an irrelevance to scoliosis, despite plenty of experience from those with it that there's a relevance to it, or at least that needs explaining. And then on the other side, then to some, particularly those that are then, they've usually got a cure up their sleeve, implying that everything is relevant to it, and that that there is something so inevitable that there isn't any management around it that would help, but for their usual preferred cure. So somewhere in the middle, of course, you and I sit, and we want to advocate for. What do you feel is the sort of best practice guidance that you would have, and what would be your go-to thing that you'd change in the system for people that have scoliosis? What would you want for them?
I would like to see much better information about it. A better clinical awareness. I mean, there are, I could go through the types of scoliosis, but it's so important. They're not all the same. Congenital scoliosis, for example, is a misformed vertebrae. De novo scoliosis is adult degenerative, which occurs, as I understand it, as you age, or can occur, and of course, and is generally in the lumbar area. Idiopathic scoliosis, which is really what I feel more confident about talking about, can be thoracic, lumbar, combinations of both. You can have a thoracic structural curve with a compensatory lumbar curve. That actually means that if you fix the thoracic curve, the compensatory curve will fix itself. But equally, you can have what I have, which is triple major, which means all my three curves are structural. So it's detail like that. Whilst people might think, well, what does it matter? It's scoliosis, it's a curve in the spine. It does matter, because if we're not talking the same language and the narrative isn't accurate, then we do get the wrong information. And again, the patient isn't confident about the treatment they're getting, or the lack of treatment, and isn't confident about where to go. And I could take an example. Functional scoliosis, as I understand it, is not actually a structural scoliosis. And I have met quite a lot of clinicians who say, oh, I treat scoliosis, and I've had patients who the curve has straightened. Well, I think they believe that. They believe that their treatment has straightened the curve. And in fact, their treatment has contributed, but it's not accurate. You didn't straighten the structural curve. And the damage done, I think, anecdotally, is that people then believe that as well. And so we don't get the change needed, because there's not enough, in my opinion, there's not enough initiatives out there. It's looking at how do we help scoliosis patients with physio or with treatment. So I want to see, first of all, a better understanding. And my understanding about physio training is that there's not an awful lot done in the training about it. It's more experience on the job. And I think that's where we get these discrepancies and conflicts of information. And when you ask me what do I want to see, I fundamentally believe in physiotherapy. I think largely because it's within the NHS training. So I personally, and the people around me, we have a confidence, we have a trust in our NHS. And that initial confidence, I think physiotherapy comes because it's available on the NHS. So I want to see a better treatment on the NHS, and I want to see good treatment in private practice being able to feed back into the NHS. I'm really lucky that I can pay for private physio, but I pay for it so that I can carry on working. And if I can't pay for it, I will get no treatment at all. And so I want to fight for those who need this treatment and aren't in the position I'm in.
It's a shame that it is a shame, though, that in many ways you you pay for your treatment in order to keep yourself working full time, to pay your taxes, to fund an NHS that then isn't necessarily, or hasn't been there for you in this instance as well as you'd like. Now, of course, we're all very proud of it, and it's just a shame that in this specific circumstance it couldn't be. So you're supported by the health system of which you're paying for the specific.
There's an irony there, but such is life. I mean, obviously, my treatment enables me to live a quality of life as well.
It's not. I'm not just saying it's turned you into a wage slave or something like that. Of course, I mean, there's other benefits. Yeah, I bet. What I want to ask Bernadette is that there's been, I mean, in the most part, much like this conversation, you and I agree on a great many things. I think where there's been times where I think maybe I've frustrated you somewhat is when I've broadened the disciplines a little. I've often been speaking the language of saying that I don't have a preferred flavour of therapist, and that I just think that there's good and bad everywhere, and that unfortunately I'm disappointed by some of my physiotherapy colleagues. But for another example, I've got chiropractors that I would have treat my friends and family sooner than I would some physios. And whilst that doesn't, I don't know if there's any of those things I've said that you would disagree with, but you have felt you've wanted to appeal to me to say you need to be a bit more cautious with that because you have had experiences that have frustrated you outside of physiotherapy. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think that's very fair to say. I mean, I encountered again on Facebook, and I was quite naive at the start. I didn't know any differences between physiotherapy, chiropractor, osteopathy. I didn't know that chiropractic wasn't offered on the NHS, and there is a group of chiropractors in the US who are particularly involved in treating scoliosis, and I can't be more upset with their treatment plan, how they present their treatment, what they claim to be able to do. It's a very expensive program. It makes all sorts of claims, but particularly it scaremongers if you don't have this treatment. It scaremongers about the future, and it completely distorts what the surgical solution by basically making all sorts of claims about the US medical system and that sort of thing. So it was quite scary, and I gradually was able to challenge, and eventually I was thrown off the group. A number of us were, and it is a huge issue for a lot of us in this country because people are so desperate. They go to these places, and I know that's very extreme, but they go believing because everything they're offered is couched in medical terms. The clinicians call themselves doctors, and they are none the wiser, and they're vulnerable. It preys on vulnerable people, that sort of treatment. Now, it's not the case in the UK, but nevertheless, you still can see and hear and adverts about claiming to straighten your spine by people who don't work in the NHS, and that's my problem with it. It is it's wrong because they're misinformed, but it's also damaging, and you will always get anecdote. I mean, I love that phrase. The plural of anecdote is anecdotes. It's not evidence, but that's the world that you inhabit, that sort of world of, well, it worked for so and so, and it's worked. I can show you this and I can show you that, and you constantly.
And they want to imply that then tells you about the mechanism of what actually helped, which it doesn't, of course. But we haven't got long, so I want to make sure I do ask this is when. I never really. It's really interesting for you to have heard this from me because I hadn't before. Where you feel that there is something that comes from the vouch that comes from the NHS. There is something that then is a mark of credibility that's relevant there. That helps you as a consumer to respect and trust physiotherapy en masse compared to chiro en masse, although that doesn't mean that you've not encountered and would still maybe encounter variation within that. What I want to ask then is, of those UK chiropractors that I do work with, that I've said that, you know, really there's just not a hair's breadth between our styles of practice, what would you advise they do when they're trying to reform and improve? Because their argument is that they agree with, I agree with you, Jackie, I agree with you, Bernadette, there shouldn't be much difference, but they are, say, chiropractors of 10 years experience, that just happens to be the certificate that's on their wall. They're working in an evidence-informed fashion. What would you suggest they do?
Well, I don't really understand when you say they work in an evidence-informed fashion, because as I understand it, the approach for dealing with back pain, forget about scoliosis, is all about natural progression. It's about exercise. It's not focusing on damage. And my experience of talking to people who go to chiropractors, it's all about looking at damage. Now, ironically, for scoliosis patients, yes, there is damage, for want of a better word, deformity. But my understanding, you know, with physio is that you have support, and but you are empowered yourself, and that's not what I understand chiropractors do. And I don't understand if why do we have why is not everyone a physio, or everyone an MSK person doing the same thing? I can't understand quite why we have this definition, and particularly because it's not available on the NHS. So I almost don't have any advice. It's just please don't keep saying that you can straighten the scoliosis curve.
Straighten spines, yeah, fair enough.
And could you know, it does need to be a consistency of treatment, because their model, I don't think, is the same as the current model for treating pain. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I
think that's fair enough. I think that there's sort of history and the legacy of it, as well as what the standard. If you took the mean chiropractor, I don't mean that they are mean as people. No. The median, let's go at the average.
But I just want to also say, I mean, ironically, because for us, I mean, the focus now on dealing with back pain, you know, there's no x-rays, or we don't x-ray routinely, and yet x-ray chiropractors do. That's an interesting kind of well, it's an interesting perspective. So what is going on there? And also I think sometimes alternative complementary medicine seizes on, oh well, we can do what they clearly can't do, so we're sort of better than them, or we're more informed than them. And I don't think that's the case. I think the lack of treatment in the NHS for scoliosis is contributing to this, rather than
it's moving people into it's squeezing people into the hands of the more unscrupulous. Then by the time
it is, and the FCP initiative as well, that worries me, because if you haven't got someone who understands scoliosis seeing the patient, then you could go down the wrong road. So it is a difficult one, that scoliosis needs to be seen for what it is, and appropriate treatment pathways followed. And that way, I feel that people wouldn't be so desperate that they have to recourse to. I mean, I'm sure you're right that there are very good non-physios out there who can give support and give good pain advice. But maybe we wouldn't have to keep going outside of the system to it if it was offered within it.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. And I think what is, you know, I want to just assure you that I'm not for a second an apologist for some of the chiropractors that you're describing. But then similarly, I feel just the nature of my exposure to it means that I've met a few really good eggs in that space, as well as unfortunately been disappointed with some of my own. And I think that exposure to that variety will have been different, but that doesn't necessarily make it any better. And I'm therefore glad we've been able to unpack this in a bit of a longer form, because as ever, the more me and you chat and more that most of us chat, in this sort of format, then we find ourselves not disagreeing much at all. So
Yeah,
I really do thank you for your time, Bernadette. It's been really insightful, and hopefully we can speak again another time. But yeah, just to let people know a little bit about where they can find you, especially on Twitter. You do share some thoughts there. You'd be well worth following. So if you could just give us your Twitter handle.
It's at BJJ, which is BEEJJAY, which are my initials. So
Brilliant. No, thank you very much. For those that have been tuning in, thank you. And I'm sorry for those that have been, they've changed the algorithms a little bit, so I can't get your comments in real time necessarily to bring them up on screen like I used to. But I'm working on it, and hopefully next week I'll be back up to speed with all of the fancy technology that I usually use. But for now, thank you all so much, and thank you, Bernadette. Really appreciate it, and have a lovely weekend. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you very much, Jack.